Hello and welcome to the Big Technology Podcast, a show for cool-headed, nuanced conversation of the tech world and beyond. Our guest today is Jim Lanzone. He's the CEO of Tinder and someone who I've known for quite some time, dating back to his days running CBS Interactive. Jim, welcome to the show.
Oh, it's great to be here.
Great having you. You've made quite a move going from a content company to a dating app. Your personal story is interesting, but I first want to ask you, who are your users when it comes to Tinder? Is it Gen Z? Is it millennials? Is it older folks? Who's using this app? Because it originally started, it started my generation with millennials, but I imagine the young kids want to date as well. So who's using it?
Well, there's definitely been a generational shift. I mean, Tinder started in August 2012. And so that was right in the heart of millennials. Mm-hmm. There's definitely been a generational shift where Gen Z has made it their own over the past couple of years. And so, about half the user base is probably Gen Z at this point. But, and I'm still relatively new, so I, don't take credit for this, but Tinder is pretty much number one in every age group. And, even Gen X and older. It also depends by country because we operate in 190 countries. We're number one, I think, in over 115 countries. And in some of those, like India, Japan, it's big, but there's a little bit of a nuanced, difference. It's a little more matrimony driven, whereas the trend in many other places is less so. So it kind
you guys
of
are
depends.
In 190 countries?
Yeah, we basically operate everywhere.
Wow.
Except, not with like an office, but like we're available everywhere except like North Korea and Iran. And
I was going to ask, where are you banned? So those two countries? I see.
Yeah. I think we were banned in Pakistan too, actually.
Are people in those three countries still using Tinder, but just like having a VPN?
Like contraband?
Yeah,
I think there are people in various countries like that who do try to sneak in.
I see. People are going to want to date. That's just how it goes.
That's right. You have food, shelter, and I think we're next.
Yes, that's right. So when it comes to generations, obviously all generations date a little bit differently. But from my understanding, the breakdown between the way that millennials date and Gen Z dates or even uses your platform is pretty interesting. So can you share a little bit in terms of the distinctions between millennial and Gen Z? And I imagine those two are your biggest group of users. I think I heard you on a previous podcast where like Gen Z is 50% of your user base or something like that. If you could give us like a little sense as to like what the numbers are and then the differences in behaviors.
Exact numbers are always secondary research, so it's a little hard to understand percentage of that generation, but I actually answer it in two ways. One is Gen Z has these fundamental differences, but what we're seeing is that everyone is starting to share those differences coming out of COVID, or they actually started to happen during COVID, which is kind of best explained as what I would call less transactional, less of a hurry to kind of get to the date and figure out, what's happening there, and making it a little bit more about the journey than the destination is how I would put it. That's definitely been a generational shift pre-COVID for Gen Z, where it's more about getting to know somebody first before deciding if there is that spark. And then, again, what happened with COVID was at first nobody could go anywhere. And so you were forced into this virtual world. Things like video chat became important during that time, where prior to COVID, kind of like Zoom or WebEx or Blue Jeans, we had them, but people weren't using them. And it was kind of true of video chat as well.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that if somebody asked somebody else to video chat before the pandemic that they met on a dating app, they would be viewed as a creep or a weirdo.
I don't know about creepy. I just think people were like, what? Why would I do that?
Right.
And it was true in the work world. We would do phone calls. We would do video calls with like 6 people in a room. You would do anything except do a video, like we wound up all doing during COVID. So that became, I think, a trend for almost every age group. And what we would see is, remember last summer, things opened up a little bit. But instead of kind of going back to, hey, let's go meet for a drink and let's get to this, it was like, hey, let's go hiking. Or we saw,
Mm,
I think you've heard me say we had a 3x increase in mentions of roller skating. And people
mm.
just want to do
Yeah,
activities
I've heard a
together
lot
to get
about
to
roller
know each other.
skating. I feel like roller skating has had the biggest unheralded pandemic boom out of any recreational activity. I would
Yeah,
sort of imagine that
by the way, if you
by
go to like
way more people. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
if you go to Santa Monica Beach, it's
Is
amazing
that
to see
what's
that
going on?
rollerblading is still a thing.
Yeah,
Who knew
yeah.
that? But
I recently, after a long time now, after being vaccinated, went to the Church of Eight Wheels in San Francisco. Have you heard of it? It's an
no.
old church that's been converted into a disco roller derby. I think that's a topic for another, or disco
First of
roller
all,
skating
yeah, my
rink.
wife
So
would be all over that.
it's pretty
She would
cool. I
love
had a
that.
disco ball in the middle of the church, and stained glass windows, but obviously it's no longer in use. It was a
Yeah,
true like, oh, this is a real San Francisco experience. A
yeah, I'm
totally
sure that or Central
heretical.
Park.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. Okay, so we'll put
yeah,
roller skating aside
yeah.
for a
So
moment.
look,
So they
I
went
think
more
those are
activity based.
the two
Hmm.
major trends there, and that dovetailed with me coming in here, and everything I
Mm.
love to do is product innovation and product development, and getting to know the user base right away. It definitely led to a lot of the things that we're starting to launch on Tinder.
Yeah. So, well, what are you starting to launch? Maybe we go there.
Well, I'll give you the quick version. The quick version is the big one is we're launching video, which
So
is
video
something
and
that
profiles.
video and profiles, and I do think that's an important nuance because we're not. Some people have said, "Oh, is that to compete with social media?" Absolutely not. I think it's a 180 from social media. The point on Tinder is not to broadcast yourself or to attract followers or for us to attract attention to monetize through advertising. We're a subscription based service trying to provide value, but people are three dimensional. They're not one dimensional. It's not just about a photo and a little bio. And definitely is time that we gave people the tools to do that. And so yeah, the way we're doing it is letting people upload video straight out of their photo library. We have an editing tool that lets you edit it down, and it will show up in the Tinder card stack, which is how you swipe through Tinder for those who don't use
Hmm.
it. And it'll videos will show up seamlessly right alongside
Yeah.
photos.
So you're not going to make it mandatory that someone puts a video, but if they want to use a video as their profile picture, they can.
That's right. And that way, it's also seamless by
Right.
generation, right? You would imagine
Yeah.
Gen Z is going to do a lot of it, and older people may be more hesitant to
Yeah.
do so. But either way, they'll see it, and that will kind of advertise it to other users within the app.
Right. What else do you have cooking?
So down that pathway of roller skating and video chat and get to know you, uh, we saw that it wasn't just about swipe left, swipe right. What they're really saying is swipe maybe or swipe possibly, and people want to find out more about other people, and they want to share experiences with them as a way to do that. But they're very open to doing that virtually, and not just offline. So what we're doing is we're launching an Explore tab or hub within the app that will be the home to all kinds of different activities to do together, icebreakers to participate in together, and will become this very robust part of Tinder. Again, getting beyond the one dimensional swipe left,
Hmm.
swipe right, chat and meet, and giving people all these richer ways to authentically express who they are and then get to know other people. And so one
Yeah.
example of that is another thing we're launching. This one's called Hot Takes, which is a pre-match. It's almost speed dating, but in a way. But there are questions that we will present to you, and then we're going to match you with somebody else who chose that same topic. And then for someone who chose the same answer as you, throw you then into a chat. You have a 30-second countdown to see if
Hmm.
there's a match, and then you decide whether to match or not. And that's on the back of one we did last month called Vibes, which is kind of similar, which over 10 million people used. It was appointment viewing. It was actually, you had to go online at that time of that event. 10 million people did it. And then last year we had Swipe Night, which over 20 million people viewed, which was like a choose your own adventure TV show essentially within Tinder that increased matches 26%. So people were really into this idea of having some activity to do together to figure out whether there's a spark, not just do it based on a photo and a bio.
So, and I've been wrong about tech product decisions a lot throughout my career, as you could probably attest if you've read stuff that I've written. I'm a little skeptical of the fact that this is going to be something that lasts outside of the pandemic. I think that when people can worry about getting the coronavirus from others in real life, then going on all these adventures sounds pretty appealing. But when life returns to quote unquote normal, and you are able to just go meet somebody at a bar because they're open and you don't need to go in with a mask, then potentially, and you don't have to wait for warm weather to meet someone, then potentially things just revert back to normal. So I'm curious from your
Yeah.
perspective, these are obviously big changes to the product. What about people's behavior? And you said this starts with Gen Z, so maybe we can think about them. What about people's
Yeah.
behavior leads you to believe that this is going to be a permanent change and not just something that, felt like a fun thing to do during the pandemic, but no one really wants to spend time trying to meet people in the digital world and hang out with them when they can actually go out and be outside or inside in a bar or restaurant together?
Well, there's a reason that Tinder, I mean, if you think about the history of the internet, it's very rare that you've had product market fit at a level that Tinder had. Uber, I mean, there's very few that were at that level. And one of the
Yeah,
reasons is,
Jim, let me tell you, I remember hearing the first time about Tinder. My roommate, I was
yeah,
living in Brooklyn at the time. My roommate, I'd never seen his eyes light up about this because he came out. He's like, dude, this guy from Brooklyn, dude, there's this app. You got to hear about it, and it's
yeah,
just like all you do is swipe. It was a revolution, and it quickly picked
yeah,
up and turned, I think, probably into the world's most prominent dating app. But okay, sorry, I didn't
it
mean to
definitely turned
interrupt
into
you.
that.
Yeah.
But if you think about, what happened over the last 10 years is you've gone from online dating being 5% of creating 5% of relationships to it's now pre-pandemic was already over 40% of relationships were being started online. And it's by far the number one way. The second way, the most common way people meet is through friends. We know the work world's going away as a place that people should be meeting people to date. And you think about all the different places in life. I mean, a bar was one of the most inefficient ways to meet somebody. Unless you're the guy, your friend with that accent. Sounds like he's somebody who would
Oh, he
be a
didn't have
night,
many
night at the
problems.
Roxbury.
That's right.
Uh, but look, online dating had already replaced that. So if you talk
Yeah.
about what was normal before the pandemic,
Mm.
online dating was already number one. And
Yeah.
it's not just for relationships, it's also for marriages, right? And there's
Yeah.
actually,
You
it's
have
one of the most
this.
unsung
Yeah.
thing about Tinder is there's a chance it's the number one source of marriages, which is odd. It's not always how people think about Tinder. But I think one of the great things about Tinder is it's not judgmental about the outcome. It could
Right.
be for the person who wants to meet someone in the bar. It could be someone who wants to get married. Our job is to match you with the right person. And so that is what we do now. People, especially Gen Z, as we talked about, what's normal for them pre-pandemic was already slowing things down, getting to know people, and virtual relationships being extremely authentic to them,
Mm.
and different than
That
what
could be in
millennials.
a gaming environment, for instance, where they'll hang out. Well, I heard a stat recently where in Fortnite, people actually spend more time in their own development area where they can just kind of chill with their friends as their avatars than
Yeah,
actually in the battle royale mode. And so if you think about that, actually, when it comes to Tinder, if you guys can build an experience that resembles that, where people feel normal meeting each other online and hanging out, then potentially you take advantage of that trend. Is that
that's
where you're
right.
going with this?
100%, that's 100% where we're going. But again, I think it's super important to draw the distinction that unlike probably any other type of app, our job is not to keep them here.
Hmm.
We're building those experiences in service of connecting you with the right person. And again, not just to go play tennis, like not for friendship. There are other apps for that. Ours is for that spark, right? That Tinder gets its name from, and that's why we're doing it. And so I do think that's extremely valid, and it was already headed that way. Like with a lot of things, I came out of streaming most recently. Streaming was already the trend. COVID accelerated it, right? Remote work was probably the trend, and COVID accelerated it. So, again, I don't think we're going back. But Tinder, like let's say like Uber, where you're connecting to get a ride in the real world. Tinder has a real world component where we leave you at the time at which you're going to decide to go meet up in real life, and we've done our job up to that point in many ways. So I don't think the real world coming back slows dating down or online dating down. I think that they work together, and that has just changed a little bit.
Right. So I go back to my question that I asked earlier, which is if coming back to normal doesn't slow anything down, then, and I understand there's a need to do product innovation and keep people engaged in the app. But why do you think? Because it seems like the experiences that you're talking about, especially, these what are they called? Hot takes, or
Yep.
it seems like those will actually keep people in the app longer. And I guess, like,
Well, but
I'm
only
curious, like,
yeah.
I just want to just finish this thought. Why does it, why is that gonna, why do you think that will take off as opposed to the, excuse the expression, but like quick and dirty way that people would use Tinder beforehand?
We'll work backwards. I
Hmm.
think the
Yeah.
majority of people have a hard time. I mean, I think there's more than one thing. One is, to your
Yeah.
point, you may feel very comfortable talking to strangers. A lot of other people aren't,
Mm.
and they would love, especially young people, they would love to have a way to have icebreakers or to have an activity. Think about it another way.
Mm.
In real life, going to a movie or a concert and then going to get a drink versus just going to
Right.
get a drink. You're like, hey, who are you? Right? You have
Yeah.
something to talk about. But in the case of Swipe Night, going back, a year
Right.
plus, it was, hey, we both chose the same pathway
And
through
Swipe Night
this.
is this choose your adventure game
Yeah, I mean,
type
for
of thing.
anyone who, I don't know how many people listening saw the Bandersnatch episode of Black Mirror,
Hmm.
where it was
Where
the
you could
Choose Your Own
click your way
Adventure
through.
episode.
Yeah.
This was I say this coming out of the TV industry, a way better version of that.
Okay.
They should have been
Cool.
studying what Tinder did.
Yeah.
And I wasn't here for it, so I'm not taking credit for it. But it was
Right.
really cool, and
Hmm.
you would wind up with a series of decisions that you made along your decision tree, and
Hmm.
then you'd wind up with a certain ending. And so you would
Right.
get matched up with people who chose some of those same pathways, and it would make people pissed. They'd be like, "How would you defend Zane on that
Ah.
thing that he did?" Or you wind up in this same outcome, and that caused a 26%. That's huge increase in matches.
It's interesting
So
because,
yeah.
we talk about the pandemic. What's the pandemic? How's pandemic going to change behavior? I don't know if this is going to fade away, but I've definitely heard from lots of people that they're going to be more selective in terms of who they spend their time with after this.
Yeah.
And I think before there was a feeling that life is just going to be unlimited, especially among young people. I think people have a much better sense of their own mortality now and don't want to, just go out on a date with anyone. And if these experiences can create deeper interactions with people, then potentially you get to a place where you're then serving that need. Does that sound right to you?
100%.
Yeah.
So I won't just restate what you said, but to add to it, I also think what's important to people is, the idea that, or the hope that they find somebody awesome
Mm.
who is unexpected. And dating apps have been pushing this. I mean, if you look at the increase in interracial marriages that have happened because of dating apps and people just getting outside of their normal social circle or bar scene in Brooklyn or their friends, to
Right.
meet someone new and different from a different culture or just who they didn't, know before. And another version of that is if you really get to know somebody, could be within our app and different experiences we give you or, later, you're going to increase your chances of finding the right person, instead of just going off your assumptions at the beginning. So I think that's another reason people are really leaning into that part of these things. And we need to give, again, we're not creating these in the hopes that people use them. We're doing it to respond to what we're seeing and what they need.
Yep. All right. Let's take a quick break. I want to come back and ask you a few more questions about people on Tinder's behavior. And then maybe we go to the business side of this thing.
Sure.
So let's take a break. We'll be back right here on Big Technology Podcast with Jim Lanzone. He's the CEO of Tinder. And we're back here on the Big Technology Podcast with Jim Lanzone. Good guy, CEO of Tinder. He and I know each other for a while. Jim, I think the first time we met was at Levi Stadium where the 49ers play. There was a panel about, I don't know what it was, like fantasy football or something like that.
I think,
Do
was
you
it
remember
the
this?
Super Bowl was coming maybe, and
Super
we
Bowl
had
was in the Bay Area. And there was a fun discussion. It's actually interesting, real life and virtual life and how they blend. That was part of the discussion. And there was a moment where I asked the group, is esports the same as in real life sports? And everyone had their own. Do you remember what your answer to that is, or what would you say today? Is you
Yeah, I'd say the answer is probably somewhere in the middle.
in the middle? Yeah. So we had
where because I remember talking to like I think one of the differences from a spectator point of view, right? And I don't think there's a huge difference from a gamer point of view. The athlete is the athlete, and I would say that about chess, as well, which has gone crazy during the pandemic probably because of Queen's Gambit. But I think the spectator side is different, and it's not quite as broad, probably.
Well, the thing that I think that's interesting, we had like the head of operations at EA up there who was talking about how the audience is growing and eventually will exceed that of regular sports, and I thought that was interesting. But anyway,
by niche though, probably. I mean, meaning like you get there in a different way, I would assume.
Yeah. And so my perspective is that esports isn't anything close to the actual game. And we had a younger former 49er player who was up there who was like, esports is sports, no difference between the person playing a video game and what I do professionally. And then Lynn Swan, the Hall of Fame wide receiver.
Went to my high school, by the way.
Right. Okay. Yeah, he was in the audience. And I was like, I wonder what Lynn Swan has to say. And Lynn gave me this look and then walked out of the room. And I was like, I just pissed off Lynn Swan, future Hall of Fame, or not even future Hall of Fame wide receiver. He comes back in the room with a folding chair. And I'm like, oh, it's about to get interesting. He puts the chair on the stage and he goes, they're not athletes. I was like, oh, we have an answer. So anyway, that was a fun first interaction. I'm glad I made it through.
Years ago now.
I thought I was in some trouble there. Okay, so I want to ask you. Let's get back to Tinder.
Sure.
Interesting hearing about these experiences. I like the term swipe maybe, or people trying to get to know each other beforehand. You mentioned, I think you've mentioned before, 10% of marriages in the U.S. might be traced back to Tinder. I had a conversation with your predecessor, who after years of having Tinder deny the fact that it was a hookup app, had basically said, this is a hookup app. So I'm kind of curious, like what your perspective is on, is it a hookup app? Is it a relationship app? Is it something in the middle?
I have some maybe sociological or views of that, where I actually think this goes back to the product market fit.
Mm-hmm.
I think when Tinder hit the scene, which I remember, I knew the founders, I'd worked at IAC, I pretty much knew everybody involved in the creation of Tinder. And, I'm close to the people at Benchmark and who had gotten involved later too.
The VC firm. That
I think that the innovation, the innovations of double opt-in and swiping and all these things were so powerful, and that there was more to glean from that. And I don't think it was purely superficial. I just think it was another form of hitting the senses than what had been for 50 years before that of singles ads in newspapers leading up to Match.com and all the others, which is, I like to go for long walks on the beach, descriptions of yourself. And so, and it was geolocated. And so that, so what happened in my view is that Siri decided to turn on. I just think the product market fit was so significant it led to hookups, because that's totally valid. That, I like this person, I'm going to go meet them, and then that would happen. So I think at its core, what Tinder is great at is matching people. And what's interesting is that's now led to it being also number one for creating relationships. I think we hit the entire spectrum. And by the way, people who are really into each other on night one could wind up getting married. I mean, it's the whole thing.
Yeah.
I think that's our job. So I actually think, believe it or not, the hookup thing is more of a titillating question to people, especially older people. I don't think that that's thought of as much by Gen Z. and they just like to giggle around that subject matter. But the truth is, and if you think about it another way, like, why is that even relevant? Connecting people is what's relevant. They take it
Yeah.
where they want to take it, and everything can happen. I mean, there was an article last week in BuzzFeed. The woman reviewed what she called hookup apps, which included us, Bumble,
Hmm.
Hinge, I think Plenty of Fish. The comment section was filled with people saying that they'd met their significant other or partner on Tinder.
Yeah.
Michelle Obama last year said, "Don't, if you want to get married, get off Tinder." And she got, I love Michelle Obama, but she got hammered with the world
Yeah.
reacting to that. So I think either way, our business model stays the same, and our
Hmm.
job is to make a great connection, and you take it where you want to take it.
Yeah. I've always thought that people who call Tinder a hookup app are off base, and that you're right. Like, I mean, most relationships in general, they don't start with someone saying, "This is going to be the person I marry," and they develop. And so, why not online as well? It seems like it mirrors the behavior that we have. And it's interesting that you point out that, like, this is something that comes from potentially older people,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm curious what you make of there's like a whole generation of folks, and this was just on a podcast that you did with Howard Lanzone, folks who are like, "Yo, if I was on Tinder, I would have crushed it," and they talk about
Yeah.
maybe there's a little bit of jealousy of, from people who are beyond, the age or whatever the life station where they would use the
It,
app who want to denigrate it and just call it a hookup app. So curious what you
it's
think
just more
about that.
efficient and effective. It is,
Yeah.
maybe the difference between having the ability to have groceries delivered right to your house or a car brought right to you versus just hoping you wave your hand
Hmm.
out and see what happens. It just, it really works. At the end of the day, it really just works.
Yeah. Okay. I want to ask you a little bit about behavior and makeup on the app, makeup of the demographics. So I've heard you say that there's far more men than women on the app. Are you able to share that breakdown?
On all dating apps. Yeah.
Okay. Every single one.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I mean, even Bumble. My understanding is that the percentage of women is still in the 30%. Not, it's not 30, but it's in the
Yeah.
30s,
So
and
yours
it
is
may
two.
be. It's probably a bit higher than ours.
Hmm.
But there's obviously, just by law of numbers, there are more women on Tinder. They just have a higher percentage. But
Right.
either way, it's a lower percentage than you would think. It's not 50-50. And yeah, I mean, I'm still diving in all the reasons for that, and
Hmm.
I think it's a big opportunity for us in terms of how do you solve this for women in a really good way. The same way that I think there's a lot we can do for LGBTQ plus, and there's the different demographics.
Yeah. Another thing that I've heard is that. So wait, just to confirm. So your numbers are like 30%.
No,
Men
no, no.
are
It's
Women are 30 in the 30s. Men are in
yeah,
the
and I believe that's
60%.
basically true for
Yeah.
almost every app. Now, that's not true. That's United
Right.
States. Like, if
Yep.
if you go to
Hmm.
Scandinavia, it's closer to 50-50. If you go to India, it's lower than 65
Really?
35 or whatever the actual number is. I can't
Yeah.
remember the
Yeah.
exact number, but let's call it in that range.
Hmm.
And also true in Asia, where which is our largest growth markets right now are in Asia.
Hmm.
And I just think that's a societal thing, and it's being solved by the younger generation. Just has fewer hangups about this,
Right.
but yeah, generally speaking.
Yeah. Yeah. That was an interesting thing to me that kind of jumped out, and I was like, "Oh, I'm curious what Jim thinks about this." Another thing that I've heard, this didn't come from you guys, or maybe it did, I don't really remember, is that like 5 or 10% of the men on the platform get like 90% of the attention or the interest.
Don't think that's anywhere close to true, and I think
Hmm.
that sounds like it's an old data point.
Okay.
So
So
yeah,
yeah,
I
so
don't
it's
believe that
fairly
that's true.
evenly spread out, people's interest in each other. So the marketplace is working essentially.
If you think about it, we have 100 marketplaces. You have,
Uh huh.
um, you know what I mean? Like, just every different same sex community,
Hmm.
where, by the way, even a way higher percentage than for uh, hetero couples met
Hmm.
online. That's more
Yeah.
like 70%.
Yeah.
By the way, and I also think it's interesting. You've probably seen this stat too, that people who meet through these apps, generally speaking, have longer and happier relationships. And I actually think the more I
Hmm.
spend more time I spend with it, the more I understand why. Which is it's not just some happenstance meeting or a meeting of convenience from your job or your
It's a
school.
pretty
You're actually
intentional.
being matched with somebody.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Are are Gen Z and millennials dating each other, or do they generally stick to their demographic?
I mean, I think it depends what age
Yeah,
range people said. I mean, I would say for the
right.
most part, people are probably within their age range.
One thing that I heard is that Gen Z is the millennials put, and this I think came from your team. Millennials put a lot of care into their profiles and make sure they have the perfect shot, where Gen Z is less
That is,
intentional
again,
about it.
I'm generalizing here,
Yeah,
obviously, you know what I
yeah. Of
mean?
course,
But
say yeah.
I would argue that
Hmm.
that is very far from true.
Really? Okay.
Meaning
Hmm.
everybody puts a ton of work into that
Okay.
profile,
Yeah.
which if you think about is one reason why we need to expand the number of things that you're able to do to express yourself
Yeah.
versus just have the bio and just have a few photos, right?
Totally.
By the way, just to also point, we're also
Hmm.
launching, which I didn't mention earlier, within our Explore tab, the ability to basically take the steering wheel a little bit and decide, um, you know, uh, which category you want to, essentially swipe through at any given time. So you can go
Hmm.
into pet mode and just go
Oh,
through people who
interesting.
also like dogs. You can go
Yeah.
through just your university. You can go through people just who are also thrill seekers, like you are, if
Mm.
you're into certain activities. Um, there's actually a lot of those that are going to be launched with that part of the app. Now, once you get in there, it's still lean back, and we're gonna still use our technology to match you, but it just gives people a little bit more control over the Tinder experience, which they've said they want as well.
Yeah,
It matters to them, I think, is what the underlying thing is here.
for
You
sure.
know,
So okay, so I was off on that one. We had a question on Twitter actually, so, along these lines. Someone asked, "Oh, what is the percentage of people that end up having a conversation after matching?" I don't know if you can share this. I'm sure it's proprietary, but I'm going to ask you anyways. They said that they've heard from a competitor that only 7% of people actually chat after matching. Is that
sounds like
true?
that's a competitor. No, obviously the number is way higher. And
Yeah.
I will give you a couple interesting stats, which is that during COVID, the number of messages increased by 20 percentage points higher than baseline. Like, so
Okay.
not just in terms of going with the user growth, but
Right.
20 points over that. The number of messages within, or the length of those conversations increased 32%.
Okay.
So
So
basically, the
people.
trend has been longer, more, and that
Mhm.
continued even during the first summer of love, which was last summer.
Okay.
It wasn't just during shutdown.
Yeah, we'll see what happens in this summer of love. It should be interesting, but it makes
Yeah,
sense. Yeah,
Fred Wilson just called it analog summer today.
and I like that
In his
analog
thing,
summer.
he was thinking
Yeah,
everything's going back analog.
yeah. I think there will be some things that will stay.
Yeah,
We had another question. Do you think the addition of face to face video messaging, so people going on FaceTime either through your app or on Facebook Messenger or Apple, is that going to change the likelihood that they're going to meet offline? Do you have any thoughts on that one?
increase the likelihood they'll meet
Or
offline because you video
change?
chatted.
Yeah, will it change that? Like, do you think that? I guess the question is: are people going to be less eager to meet offline if they video chat?
Again, I would actually argue
Yeah.
that this question is likely generational because if
Ah.
you talk to
Okay.
any younger Gen Z, especially,
Right.
they don't use the phone.
What?
Uh, they use FaceTime only.
Ah. Okay. So they're not. Oh, they're not like talking. They're using the
Nope.
phone, but they're using it to video chat.
Yep.
Ah. Okay.
So this is the trend no matter what.
Yeah.
And again, it's also the trend that these kids have entire relationships virtually over
Right.
FaceTime before they even meet in real life, with not just romantically, like with friends.
Yeah.
And that happened during lockdown too. That really like mushroomed as a
Hmm.
trend. So yeah, I mean, I think that essentially the way I look at it is the ultimate thing is always going to be able to meet in person. I mean, I'm
Right.
sure as we head towards this VR world,
Yeah.
and an avatar
Not even
world.
VR, like even in the gaming world, like I was
In the
talking about
gaming
with
world, there's
with
going
the
to be
Fortnite
real
stuff.
relationships. I mean, my friend's
Yeah.
son was telling me that his two best friends, and this kid's 14, are
Hmm.
19 and 25, and he's only ever talked to them on Discord.
Holy
And
hell.
those are his best friends.
That's wild. That's
And
wild.
I think it's totally the trend that you're going to have
Yeah.
virtual relationships too. At the end of the day,
Yeah.
there's going to be the offline component. We do the
Hmm.
baton pass at that point.
Yeah. So you have said that you've learned a lot from your kids' friends about what's
Or my
going
kids.
on Tinder, or your kids.
Yeah.
So one of the things I love to ask people who work as tech executives is whether they allow their kids to use the products that they work on.
Yeah.
Have you thought about whether you're going to let your kids use Tinder?
Well, see, that's a compliment because you're assuming my kids are younger than they are. I have a 20-year-old who just finished
Uh-huh.
his sophomore year of college, and I have
Yeah.
a 18-year-old daughter. And my son is straight, my daughter is gay, and they are both on Tinder, using it absolutely. And to be honest, it's an inspirational to me to make it better in all
Yeah.
kinds of ways, better, safer, just all these things.
Hmm.
Um, and then also, it really, again, I think for people who don't have kids or didn't meet that way, it's why people are defending that they met this way. Uh, I actually feel great about them using it at this point,
Yeah.
and I see my kids' friends on it as well.
Hmm.
Um, my son's friend just took a girl on to he matched with her, and she wanted to take him to an Oakland A's baseball game, and she almost got in a fight at the game
Nice. It's a great first
with
date.
other fans. I'm like, wow,
That's a keeper.
interesting match. That's not this guy's. He's not a fighter.
Right. Well,
But
sometimes it's good to have
yeah.
one person in the relationship throw the
So
punches.
yes, I'm
So
absolutely having them use it. It was a lot easier when I was doing streaming and they were just watching
that's right.
Star Trek.
Did you have to
Uh,
sit them down and be like, all right, kids, I got to tell you about this company that I'm thinking about working at?
oh,
And
you don't
then,
think that kids that age know what Tinder is? They
no,
know
I'm
what
sure
Tinder
they
is.
knew what it was. But like when you say, hey, this is the company that I'm thinking about running, what was that discussion like?
Yeah, they think it's super
That
cool.
was cool. Yeah.
So does my wife thinks it's super cool. I've been married
Yeah.
23 years, and
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
uh, and look, and there's been a few.
Hmm.
Yeah, so my wife is super supportive. My kids think
Hmm.
it's awesome. Their friends think it's even more awesome.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. You
it's
became the
just one of
cool
those
dad pretty
iconic
quick.
internet brands, and
Right.
it means something. It's not a
Hmm.
boring old brand. At the same time, there's so much that hadn't been done with Tinder.
Mm.
Just from you've been you've used it in the past, like it's not uh, it still in many ways resembles the same product it was years ago.
Yeah.
But what I've found, and it's been a little surprising, is there's been way more ability to innovate than I even expected coming in, and that really accelerated the past few months to where I now have a multi-year product roadmap. Where we're going to have to make some Sophie's choices if we have any more good
Wow.
ideas.
Okay.
So we're already at that stage.
Great. Share the roadmap with us.
By the way, I'll also tell you the
Yeah.
the employees of Tinder,
Yeah.
most of whom
Hmm.
are young,
Mm.
in their 20s and early 30s, and live in LA and Palo Alto, are just so passionate about the mission. To
Yep.
them, there's also no giggling about Tinder. It's real, and whether they're on the user experience team or they're on the trust and safety team, I mean they're in it to win it. They
Oh
really
yeah.
are passionate about it.
I mean, I've covered the company for many years at this point because I came into BuzzFeed writing about social media and communications. Tinder and the
Yeah,
dating apps fell right into that bucket. And I've spent time with the employees. And you're right, no joke. A lot of them have become very successful by working so hard and turning it into
yeah,
what it is today. So, all right, when we come back, let's talk. Now we just segued into it kind of perfectly. Let's talk about the business, if that's cool with you.
yeah.
So why don't we do that when we're back here on Big Technology Podcast with Jim Lanzone, CEO of Tinder. And we're back here for one last final segment of the Big Technology Podcast. Where's the time gone? Where was Tinder CEO Jim Lanzone? Jim, it's great having you. Thanks again for making the time for me. I appreciate you joining on the show.
Absolutely.
So business-wise, um, I'm curious from your perspective, what is the competitive landscape that Tinder plays in? Who are your main competitors?
Yeah, it's interesting. Look, I'd say that there's been interesting segmentation of the market, right? Um, in one way, Bumble, obviously the team there came out of Tinder, really has been around
Hmm.
almost as long. They've been around only 18 months less time than Tinder. So we've always been competing with Bumble's positioning, which is its own interesting carve off of Tinder, because we also have always let women make the first move. They don't
Yeah.
only get to make the first move. And that's become their marketing positioning. But from a product point of view, I just objectively come into this category to say there's a lot in common between the two apps. Probably more room to differentiate in the future. Hinge,
Mm.
which
Match
is a really
owns.
great up and comer, and Justin's a great entrepreneur, and we become close because we're both part of Match
Hmm.
Group. Super talented, and theirs is designed to be deleted. Is absolutely focused on. I like to say that we're for any kind of relationship and very fluid and non-judgmental about what that could mean. They're very dedicated towards a much more
Serious
serious intent
relationship.
is
Yeah.
what they're for. Which Bumble actually has moved the other way, and they have advertising in Europe now that says if just for one night or a lifetime.
Ah,
That's the
okay.
literal ad,
Interesting.
which we've
Yeah.
never done.
Right.
And then there's also by country, Bumble also owns Badu, which actually has more subscribers than Bumble does.
Hmm.
Bumble proper does. Um, and then within Match Group you see different ones for different demographics, or like BLK for the Black community, Chispa for the Hispanic community.
Hmm.
So it's been interesting to see kind of how that happens.
Is there one that's gonna win, or is it do you so obviously Tinder's the top right now, but do you see this do you see one coming out on top and staying there, or is it gonna be just sort of how much of the market can you chop off? And if there is gonna be one that's gonna win or even not, what is it that it's gonna take to win in the online dating game?
I mean, I really hate cliched answers, but I have to give you one, which is, I mean,
Uh
Tinder is by far number one today.
yeah,
I walked into that. I didn't do
yeah.
that. Um, and again, I think largely on the basis of incredible original innovation and product market fit. And then they created the great business model with Tinder Plus and Gold in 2016, 2017, that created the business that it is today. The product market fit so strong, it has skipped generations and now becomes something that everybody's using and is number one in over 100 countries for every generation. Like with anything, right? If Nike hadn't kept innovating, I'm sure somebody else would be Nike today, but they kept innovating that they weren't,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
You and I have seen that in many different categories: Spotify with Apple Music, Facebook and MySpace, Google, which, I mean, they're literally, if you go back to the Yahoo designs on that homepage,
Yeah.
they put a Google search box next to it with a link to Google.
Brilliant move, Yahoo. Just
Yeah.
kidding.
So if
Yeah.
we don't listen to customers and deliver for them and
Hmm.
innovate on their behalf, then you can lose. If we can do that, then and listen to them, especially as people change and generations change or coming out of COVID. And I really do think that one of the things that I can bring to the table is taking the governors off and actually just pushing
Hmm.
the envelope of innovating better and faster. That's what I
Yeah.
love to do. And there's just a lot more that we can do. And I think you're going to see it from us.
The thing that usually takes out an incumbent is a threat they saw not from right in front of them, but that's something that comes out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And
Reed Hastings
so,
is a great, yeah, let's talk about
yeah.
that.
So I
Yeah.
wonder for you what that could be. And I'm starting to think maybe it is like these little universes that people hang out in. I've mentioned the Fortnite thing a couple times. Another thing, I'm curious if you've heard this, that Scott Galloway, friend of the podcast, has brought up is maybe Peloton creates a dating app where you're already using the product and you have an affinity for like working out and being fit, and maybe you want to meet other people who are in the same area as that, so or same mindset as that. So I'm curious what you
Yeah.
think about those versus like saying, "Oh, how are we going to beat Bumble?"
Yeah. Look, I first of all, Peloton's awesome. I have one. I go back to IEC days with John Foley, who's the
Hmm.
founder. We both worked there together.
Yeah.
Um, Yeah, I think it would be very hard for a company that's, first of all, I heard this great Steve Jobs quote that he said to Jeff Ralston one time after they had bought their company. He's like, whatever it was, they wanted to add all these things. And
Mm-hmm.
he goes, "You people think you can do everything. Like you
Mm-hmm.
have to choose."
Mm-hmm.
And look at Facebook dating. I mean, theoretically that could take off, but like it's not so easy to
Mm-hmm.
focus and deliver something dedicated that
Yeah.
is even if it's related but different than what you do. Like, and even go back to Google. I mean, they've pretty much have gone after almost every vertical in the history of the internet and
Yeah.
tried to do it. The things that work best for Google are utilities, right? Even Maps is a utility. Like that is what they're great at. They can do it at scale. Machines can go to work, but they really haven't directly threatened, other than owning the traffic flow to people in verticals. And I think uh, our expertise and our history and experience taken together, we can't do everything either, and we won't.
Right.
But connecting people for that spark is something that we do better than anybody else. It's not easy. It's expensive,
Mm-hmm.
and history matters, and understanding how to do it really well. And I think brands matter, right? So if we take our eye off the ball from a branding point of view, and I also have a new CMO, by the way, um, which we're not going to do, then people can come in that way too. So anyway, look, I really believe in only the paranoid survive, like big time.
Yep.
So we are not going to ever relax,
Mm-hmm.
and we'll keep our eye on everything. But if we listen to this user base, we'll be fine. And if we don't listen to them, we're hosed. I mean, I think it comes down to that.
Totally. When it comes to listening to the user base, do you have to think about the trade-off that you're going to make between user experience and making money? Tinder, I think, used to be like a fairly simple interface. Now you mentioned, I think, Tinder Plus and Gold. Uh, there's all these different things that you can end up, paying for. Sometimes, companies go down that route, and uh, it takes like a free product and gloats it with all these pay type of things. I think that's especially happened in the online dating world, and ends up uh, diluting the user experience to the point where it opens the door for someone else. So do you think about that, and how do you consider the trade-offs between making money and user
Yeah,
experience?
100%. I
I
mean,
mean, I'm
it
thinking
goes
that
back to
also
my
with big technology. How many ads do I put in before people start tuning out? So, but sorry, go ahead.
well, the way
Yeah.
so I drew this a long time ago because in the search
Yeah.
industry, I remember this was at a time when you would shade the ads, and
Hmm.
the FTC would get involved if you didn't call it out a certain way. Now the ads have no shading, and you don't know what's what.
Hmm.
Um, but we always knew that there was a difference between maximizing and optimizing revenue, right? And
Hmm.
then and those lines would cross at a certain point. If you just made as much money as possible, there's an impact to the user experience, and then people don't come back,
Hmm.
and then you have no one to monetize. It's the same thing for however many minutes of a half an hour that you'll monetize in streaming for the ad-based model. And then that in freemium, and that's how we invented CBS All Access, was freemium. We had 40 million users a month watching
Hmm.
the last 5 episodes for free. We're like, well, wouldn't 10% or 20% of those people pay us a monthly subscription to get more, and not have
Hmm.
ads would be a part of that. So we run at Tinder a very simple freemium model. I think 3 tiers of subscriptions, and you get more with each tier. Similar to, I had an ad-free tier and a tier with ads and streaming. Freemium subscription models, I think, are some of the easiest and most straightforward models online.
Hmm.
And the good news is you actually don't change what you do to deliver it, right? You just have to try and create more value, and it works itself out. So I actually feel pretty good about being in this model.
Yeah. Has anything, so it's interesting coming from your position, you were working in content, moving now to
Yeah.
subscription dating. Has anything changed? Has anything surprised you about making that move over? Like in terms of like the types of decisions you make, or what it's like to even run a company doing something like this? Or does it
Believe it or
have
not, I would
lots of
argue.
parallels?
I look. I've only done consumer internet
Yeah.
for 20 plus years.
Hmm.
The only major transition that happened was web to mobile, right? That changed a lot. And then for me, it was that to OTT, which became 80% of our, almost 90% of our volume started coming straight back from the TV.
Mm-hmm.
But other than those shifts, what I would say is, believe it or not, consumer apps have way more in common than they do different. And at the
Yeah.
edges, it's dating. At the edges, it's streaming. It's
Right.
Star Trek.
Yeah.
It's NCIS or the Super Bowl.
There is
On the
some.
back
Yeah.
end, there's a lot that goes into it that maybe is different.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Operating at scale, though, is the same. And I actually think, if you think about, managing a consumer base, user acquisition, user retention, these are all pretty similar. Running a subscription product, pretty similar.
Yeah.
The nuances, though, in that last 5 to 10% are very unique in terms of
Right.
actually what makes this market different from others. So that's been my learning curve, and
Mm-hmm.
just everything from the jargon to actually all of your assumptions coming in. But
Yeah.
that's what's made it fun, I'd say.
Yeah, there's some truth to the fact that, like, I think, what did you say, at the extremes, like, the internet ends up turning into dating and content, and you've been at the top of the heap with content. Now you're
Yeah,
working at the top of the heap in dating and working to bring
yeah.
some content in. So I think it's fascinating. Jim, you seem energized and excited to be doing this work, and I appreciate you stopping by and helping, or letting me pick your mind, and helping our listeners hear a little bit about what goes on inside Tinder HQ. So thank you for joining.
Awesome, buddy. That was fun.
Super fun. Thanks to everybody for listening. As we record, we're now the number 5 podcast in tech news in the US. So appreciate you rating and sharing the podcast. If you enjoyed this one, maybe you can share and rate it. That would be great. If it's your first time listening, you want to subscribe. We do these conversations every Wednesday. And I think that's about it. Thank you to Nate Gawatney for doing the editing, Red Circle for hosting and selling the ads. And thanks again to all of you for listening. We will see you next Wednesday.